Martinez serves as Vice President Freight and Economic Development at Moffatt Nichol, a global engineering design infrastructure consulting firm with offices throughout the U.S., Europe, Australia, and Latin America. Born in Cuba, Rob has a lifelong fascination with competitive markets and economic policy. He holds a BA from Columbia and a PhD from Yale. Rob served as the Deputy Administrator at the Maritime Administration, U.S. DOT, under George W. Bush, and was promoted by the President to Associate Deputy Director of Transportation in charge of intermodal policy. He served as Secretary of Transportation for Virginia under Governor George Allen. Rob worked with Norfolk Southern Railroad as Vice President of Business Development and Real Estate, where he served a total of 24 years. He's married with 3 adult children, and Rob resides in Norfolk, Virginia. Please join me in welcoming Rob.
Thank you. Thank you. Greetings, one and all. Okay, let's talk about railroads. Rail economic development. That's what my team does at Moffatt and Nichol. RED, Team Red, Rail Economic Development. We're all about growth and unabashed in that respect. We are market-driven, and we only work projects that'll be successful for our clients in the market. If the project you're working is premised on a specific government policy, like a mandate or a subsidy, rather than on market-driven, market-based supply and demand, good luck to you. We support a market approach because private markets are the most efficient means of allocating resources, fostering our prosperity, and frankly, bolstering liberty. Remember, though, markets are a tool, not a purpose. Okay, you've got a site. We will tell you how to make it work for rail, if it can be made to work for rail. Not every site can work for rail, even sites that to a casual observer look right, they may not work. We'll review a site, its physical attributes, and, as importantly, where it sits on a given railroad, whether that's a Class 1, which are the big railroads, or a short line, or a regional. You need to understand the network location, and very much so for rail intermodal. Okay, 6 railroads, 6 majors in North America. The 2 Easterners, CSX and Norfolk Southern. The 2 Westerners, BNSF and Union Pacific. 2 Canadians, Canadian National and CPKC, both of which are very much like U.S. railroads when they operate in the United States. CPKC reaches into Mexico, where it competes against its erstwhile rival, Ferromex. Railroads are obtuse. They are difficult to deal with. If you disagree with that statement, if you think they're easy to deal with, you're probably a railroader, or you've probably never worked a railroad project. One big explanation. Railroads are the most capital-intensive industry, bar none. In a typical year, a railroad reinvests anywhere from 15 to 16 to 18 to 20, 22% of operating revenues go back into capital every single year. In the United States, a heavy capital-intensive industry is one that has 4 or 5, or at most, very most, 6% capital intensity. Railroads on a typical year will run anywhere from 15 to 20 or 22%. So generally, also, railroad assets are long-lived. You make the wrong investment decision, you are sunk. That's why if you want to understand what to expect from a railroad partner on a project, hire us and we will help you, including explaining why it is that sometimes your railroad needs to say no. Importantly, every project must meet the railroad's financial hurdles. 1956, Dwight Eisenhower was president. I like Ike. 1956 also witnessed the birth of the interstates, hugely important in the market that I work. That, by the way, is not Route 66. Also in 1956, Malcolm McLean put some containers on a ship that moved from Newark, New Jersey to Houston, giving birth to the modern era of intermodalism. 1980, Jimmy Carter was president, a good Christian in an era of much greater political civility. We did not realize that at the time. One big thing in 1980, deregulation. Passage of the Staggers Act largely deregulated the railroads, freeing them to compete on service and price. As importantly, the same year, the Motor Carrier Industry Act deregulated trucking, triggering a bloodbath in the industry, which, unlike rail, has a very low threshold for market entry. You marry deregulation to the interstates, and you start understanding where freight railroads sit in the market. That's a huge oversimplification, but it's good enough for today. There is a truck configuration, a type of truck, for virtually every commodity that a railroad moves. When a shipper complains about railroad pricing, generally it means that the trucks would charge way much more and the shipper doesn't want to pay it. Railroads compete in a market space that is largely defined by trucking. The rail industry fails to understand that at its own peril. There's a few railroaders out there in the audience, and frankly, it's all about market definition. If most of what you railroaders worry about is, well, what's BNSF doing, or what is CSX doing, or what is NS doing, or what is CN doing, we're lost as an industry. Another simplification, which is actually not a simplification. This is actual, just downright correct truth. Railroads pay for their own infrastructure. Truckers participate in an infrastructure that is largely funded by the motoring public, in which they contribute a tiny amount. That's neither fair nor unfair. It's just reality. It's just the way it is. Trucks are flexible, and they can triangulate freight fairly easily across the country. Railroads, less so. So this is a simplification. What drives a railroad profitability? Length of haul and density. Density meaning volume. The longer the length of haul, the more likely that a railroad can compete against over-the-road trucking. But there is no length of haul that is so short that it cannot be compensated for by a huge amount of volume. If you have a length of haul of only 200 or 300 miles, but you're shipping millions of the same kind of widget, a railroad can compete. Or if you're shipping from Phoenix to Nashville or Jacksonville to Tulsa, a railroad can compete. All of these factors apply to intermodal. Intermodal is today the single largest commodity that is moved by the railroad industry, easily outpacing chemicals, forest products, ag, automotive, and coal. Now, in railroad parlance, intermodal means one and only one thing. That's the movement of containers and trailers on trains. That's all it means. And in today's intermodal market, railroad market, about 93% of all intermodal moves are containers. That is boxes, not trailers. A trailer, of course, is the truck that moves with its attached rubber tire wheels on rail flat cars. Containers must be married up to chassis at origin and at destination. In rail intermodal, there is always an over-the-road option for the customer, which is truck over the road. So the landscape for intermodal is very competitive. Traditionally, the margins on intermodal were tighter, were smaller than on many other commodities like chemicals or coal, which are very lucrative. The intermodal business for a railroad is largely divided into two market segments, domestic and international. And each segment uses different equipment. Most international moves in 40-foot and 45-foot containers. Most domestic moves in 53-foot containers. So when a trucker like J.B. Hunt or Schneider talks about their intermodal business, they're referring to that part of their business that they have moved from regular conventional trucks into a domestic container, which then moves long haul on rail. So they married the short haul, customer-facing benefits and flexibility of trucking to the superior economics that you get from long haul rail. The distinction between domestic and international intermodal for a railroad has nothing to do with what's inside the box, okay? So if containerized goods land at the Port of Long Beach, and they are transshipped from an international 40-foot box into a 53-foot domestic box at a warehouse near the port, and then that box is put on a railroad, in railroad parlance, that's a domestic move. It doesn't matter that it's filled with, running shoes from Vietnam. It's a domestic move. Most of the containerized traffic that comes into the United States from Mexico, so it's imported from Mexico into the United States, it comes in 53-foot boxes. So again, for a railroad, that imported Mexican product, that's a domestic business. It's not international. Okay, so you've got a site. You know where I'm going with this one, right, folks? You've got a site. You want intermodal. Build it, and they will come. Now, obviously, in this audience at SEDC, you know that's not correct. Is the intermodal business that you're seeking to develop, is it domestic or is it international? Two very different dynamics for a railroad. An inland port, like what's pictured here, is an international play connected to a marine port. Like Greer is connected to Charleston, the Appalachian Regional Port is connected to Savannah, or Front Royal, which is this picture, is connected to Norfolk. Railroads generally do not mix domestic and international at a modest intermodal ramp. They are running two separate operating networks, one domestic, one international. The boxes are different, and the rail equipment, that is to say the rail cars, are also different. They cannot operate two networks into one modest ramp because they won't make money, all right? So the cost of capital is way too high. Operating costs are substantial. Further, do not expect your railroad partner to serve your proposed ramp even if you're paying for the ramp, okay? The railroads need a sufficient length of haul and enough confirmed, committed volume. All that said, intermodal is a growing business and can be a key element of your economic development strategy. Depending on your geography, Consider the proximity of an intermodal ramp and how best you can use its availability to promote business attraction. Having a proximate intermodal ramp means that you can compete for a type of prospect which otherwise would not be interested in considering your region. And that holds for either international or domestic intermodal. Okay, so here's Greer, South Carolina, in 2016. As I earlier stated, this is an international intermodal ramp. Same location, what it looks like now. And a domestic intermodal ramp. This is Fairburn, Georgia, 10 years ago. Here we are today. The railroads have proven adept at structuring highly reliable services such that you can attract investors to your region that would benefit from the lower line haul costs provided by rail intermodal. And businesses also appreciate the much gentler environmental impact of rail versus truck. A sound regional strategy can succeed in growing prosperity. We've seen that around Front Royal, Virginia, around Appalachian Regional Port in Murray County, Georgia. We've seen it around Rossville, outside of Memphis, Greer, the example I showed, and Fairburn. Intermodal is tremendous if you've got the right mix. For a new ramp, simple rule of thumb, if you don't have at least 20,000 containers per year that need to move a decent length of haul, it is not going to be compensatory to the railroad. Now that is at least 20,000, either domestic or international, not a mix of the two. Remember, they run on separate networks. And those containers need to commit to moving via intermodal. Simple expressions of interest by shippers doesn't cut it. If only 3 or 4 shippers in your region make up that 20,000 container moves, it might work. But if you have to corral 50 or 60 shippers to get to 20,000, forget it. Work on getting the next Toyota plant instead. So what's your geography? Is there already an intermodal that's a few miles distant that can be as much as 70 or 80 miles, depending on where you sit? You've got a shot. Railroads are not going to balkanize their network with lots of intermodal ramps. They can't start and stop trains continuously. Further, one railroad would have to think long and hard about trying to take another railroad's market share in a regional market in intermodal, rather than finding a different location in which to invest its very limited discretional capital. That's the whole point about the capital intensity of rail. You've got to appreciate it. And you've got to have a good site on which to land. That means flat. So think Iowa, but without the corn. Your good-sized acreage sits contiguous to the railroad, not perpendicular to it. The railroad is on one side, that is to say the tracks are on one side of the site, the roadway on the other. So if you've got 20,000 boxes of one kind, domestic or international, that want to move, and you've got a great property on your friendly railroad, talk to me. Importantly, multimodal is also a great opportunity and might make more sense. Multimodal means transload, same thing, okay? Multimodal, transload, same thing. A transload is where non-intermodal conventional rail cars, so we're talking conventional rail cars here, like tank cars or hoppers or center beam cars, they sit alongside conventional trucks for the transfer of cargo to the rail car. The shipper reaps the benefits of long-haul rail with consolidated shipments that weigh a great deal more than what can move over the road. This is married to the flexibility of trucks, always with a much gentler environmental impact than moving over the road. The property qualities for a transload are a great deal less strenuous than what's needed for an intermodal ramp. Further, transloads normally work within existing conventional train operations. They're not moving on the intermodal network. So you don't face the network balkanization concerns that a railroad would have with a new intermodal ramp. And there also is really no rule of thumb of what level of volume you need, because you can build transloads at varying levels of size. You need a good site, and you need anchor customers, particularly folks who today are using truck for long haul or who need to do so. Transloads can be market winners in many locations with considerably less risk. So, lots of transloads in the South. If you've got one already, hopefully you're executing on an appropriately adjacent and dependent development strategy, because it works. It works. If you're not, talk to us. Or look at the map. If you're sitting in a geographic gap for a transload, talk to us. Intermodal is a growth engine for the railroads. It requires robust market demand conditions and very specific ideal site qualities. If you are anywhere near an intermodal ramp and haven't thought through the development opportunities that it represents, they are substantial. And remember transloads. A transload may prove a more appropriate component of your development strategy. With that, I say adios y gracias. God bless you all. I guess I'm by myself, so anybody want to ask any questions? Any questions? Not a one?
Rob,
Yes.
if you're a community and you, in your region you do have an intermodal facility and it's not in your county or whatnot, how do you capitalize on that?
You've got to, as you know, you've got to have sites that are available. They do not need to be on the railroad, which is the whole thing about if you've got an intermodal ramp somewhere in your region. Doesn't have to be in your county. You've got to have a site strategy that allows investors to come in who could benefit from the long-haul economics of rail, even though they don't need to be rail direct. And, you know, because of the way the railroad networks are configured, in some locations, you could be 50, 60, 70 miles from where that ramp sits, and depending on where you are, even at that distance, it works. You don't have to be 10 miles down the road. Depends on your geography, for sure. And that all has to do with the network qualities of railroad networks, and then the markets that are being worked by the shipper. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I'm in Northeast Georgia. We have the new Blue Ridge Connect.
Excellent place, yeah.
How do we market that if we're 45 minutes to an hour away? You know, what's the best way of pitching that, although it's a little bit ways away from my community? How do we take advantage of that?
Right. I think the answer is pretty much the same. I think look through the sites that you have available to you, and determine which ones have good road connections to that Gainesville facility. Blue Ridge Connector, I think they call it, right? And in particular, what you are interested in, that is going to be, at its first phase, that's going to be an international facility. So, right now, think through who are the FDI folks that might be coming to town that, might be importing containers from overseas, bringing them in through Savannah, taking them to Gainesville, and then land them on a property, and then they push out via truck to the Atlanta market or whatever. For sure. Anyone else? Okay. Well, look, I am around all day tomorrow as well. Be happy to talk to you individually. Thank you all for your attention.
Get out of the way. He's good. Thank you. You want your notes?
I'll grab my notes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we have about 20 minutes, and then we'll begin the portion of the meeting where we have the business meeting aspect and introduce your new 2026 Board of Directors. And then after that, 6 o'clock, 6 o'clock is when the silent auction will start, and that'll go until 7:30. And that's going to be back in the room that we were having lunch at earlier. If you've not downloaded the HandBid app, take this time to download that. Go ahead and add your credit card to the app so that when you're bidding, you already have all that information in there. But we'll see you back here at 4:20.